Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Come Off Conqueror show. Thank you so much for being here. And I cannot say thank you enough to our guests this week. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Thank you.
Sara
Good to
is,
be here.
oh, thank you for being here. You are such a bright light in my life. And I don't want to put you or embarrass you, I guess I should say, but your story and what you've been through has been such an anchor to me and such an inspiration to me personally. And I know it's helped so many already too that I cannot wait to share your thoughts and your wisdom with our whole group. Come Off Conqueror, for those of you who are new to our show, it is designed to help women who are going through trauma and who are having faith crisis and feeling lost and confused and just needing support and encouragement. And we share so many different types of stories of hope and love and faith and overcoming trials. And Sara's got a really cool story to share with us today. So before we jump in, please like and subscribe and join our Facebook community and all those great things so that you don't miss any of our awesome interviews like Sara's. So today's topic is faith crisis. And Sara doesn't love that term. I don't really love that term. And I'm so sorry for the noise. Hopefully you can still hear me. I am in sunny San Diego. So we have military helicopters and stuff flying overhead. But anyway, we're going to talk about what a faith crisis is and how to find your faith, and how faith is really about having a journey. And I want all of you to know that you're not alone if you've had some faith shattering experience. We've all been there. Trauma can do that. Trauma can give you a moment of thinking, what in the crap is going on to me? And it's really normal to have doubts and confusion and questions when you're going through hard things. So, Sara, let's bring it back to your story and your faith journey and where you were a few years ago and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Okay. So it's interesting. I didn't even know a timeline. I didn't know. People would be like, "Oh, how long ago was that?" I'm like, I don't even know. Like, I just have a hard time like keeping track. I'm not good at dates. I'm not good at things like that. So I'm always like, I don't know, a couple years ago. But as I'm looking at it, it's been almost 6 years. So it's been a process. But it's just I went through and did a timeline. And it was really good for me because it's been more time than I thought it was. I just in my mind kept having this, 2 years, 3 years, but it's been longer. So anyway, I think I don't know. I feel like I tell the story different every time. I've kind of written it down. We'll see how it goes today. But I keep playing with my glasses. Sorry about that. Um, so I my husband is a long drive golfer. So along with that, we get to like travel and do fun things and meet new people. And it just kind of we've met so many amazing people all around the world. Um, I do have to say, I feel like I wasn't in like the best place personally. Like I wasn't praying, reading scriptures like I should. I'd had bigger callings in the past, which I loved, and I didn't have like a calling that I felt like super useful in. I guess I just wasn't. So I feel like sometimes your callings make you stronger, and I don't feel like I had anything like that going on at the time. So I think I was just in this place where we were going to meeting these people, and I was thinking like these guys are amazing. Like they're not LDS though, but they're like good people. So it just kind of got me wondering about life and what's going to happen to them versus what's going to happen to me. And we had a girl live with us, Nadia, who I love. She's part of our family now, and she's one of the best people I know. She's not LDS. So I just was like thinking about this stuff. And yeah, so I kind of had that stuff on my mind, but I loved reading books about people's death, and they go and like they see God and come back. So I'd read quite a few books and I loved them. They were super spiritual, made me feel great. But I read this one, and she wasn't LDS. The rest had been LDS. It was basically the same story. Um, but in my mind, she died, saw God, came back with this amazing message, which was like all the other books. But the message wasn't, hey, by the way, I have a church on the earth. Check it out, you know? And I was like, what the heck? Like, if she saw God face to face and this church is so important on this earth, why wouldn't he tell her about that? And like that, I could have read that 2 months before and it wouldn't even bothered me. Like, to me, saying it, it's like, well, no, duh, not everybody's going to be a member of the church. But right then, where I was at, it was just so hard. I was like, why am I wasting my time doing this? Like, this is a lot of work. Being a member of this church is a lot of work. So, like, if it's not that important to God that he's gonna, you know, mention it to this girl when she sees him, then like maybe I'm wasting my time. Like maybe this isn't. And it just put this doubt into my mind that I had never had before. And all of a sudden I was just questioning everything. Like it was like I climbed over a mountain and the view on the other side was completely different, but not a good view. I was like panicked. It just caused doubt. All everything I knew was no longer
Like you woke up
real.
from the Truman Show and all of a sudden
Yes.
you realized you were an actor in a movie instead of real life.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just freaked me out and I didn't know what to do with it. So I kind of sat with it. My husband is in the bishopric. So I didn't want to talk to him about it and cause doubt for him. I guess it didn't even matter he's in the bishopric, but he was. And I just didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone about it because now I can see that like that wouldn't have caused doubt. That's why I'm able to mention on this podcast. I don't think that's going to make anyone doubt their faith. But at the time, it did make me doubt. And life was not the same. So I was like, I do not want to cause this for anyone else. So I just didn't talk about it for about 2 months. I was just like, hey, not talking about this, not doing it. And then finally I opened up to my husband and said, you know what? I've had this happen. I am just really struggling. I just don't know what to do about this. And he was good. And he was like, we know not everyone's going to be LDS. Like, what are you, why is this bothering you so much? Like, we know only a small portion of people on this earth are going to be LDS, so why is that bothering you so bad? And I'm like, I don't know. It just, anyway, he
And
told
we
me that
know
stuff.
that not everyone needs to be LDS, right?
Yeah,
Like you
they
don't
don't.
have to be a part of this faith to get to heaven. Like it doesn't,
Right.
right? But I can see your point. Like that would be, if it does mean that much, how come
Like,
other
I'm working
people aren't
hard.
receiving that revelation? Right.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
see how
I'm
that would
working
be
hard
disconcerting.
to do this.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it was like, so fine. He told me that stuff and I was like, yeah, I can see that. But still, it doesn't change that I'm really like struggling. I'm questioning.
Mhm.
I already had been. It was like this door had been opened and I could not go back. So you go through this. It was just hard. I was really struggling trying to figure it out. And then my mother in law passed away about 2 months later. And that was so hard. She was such a huge part of our lives. We were out of town. They called us and it was just super hard, very unexpected. He worked with her every day at the office. Like he worked with his parents and his sister. We saw her all the time. So it was just really devastating. So then the grief that came from that just compounded all that I was feeling and everything that I was going through. And I just couldn't find my footing. I just couldn't find it. So I feel like I just that made me question eternal life. That made me question, am I really going to see her again? Are we really going to live together again? And it just got me, kind of digging deeper and deeper into these things and really just questioning, what do I believe? What do I really believe? So I prayed and prayed. I don't know. I had a prayer in my heart always. I would talk to God in my head. I didn't pray a lot. I think at the beginning I prayed more, but then you start to get kind of this resentment and anger build up when you don't get answers. So then I wouldn't say I kept praying a lot, but I just kind of always had this like prayer in my heart. I would say like, let me know what the truth is. Just let me know, please help me. And I didn't feel like answers came, and that was frustrating for me. And it's the scariest thing I've ever gone through, hands down. Like the scariest thing, to think that you might have lived a lie your whole life or everything you ever believed in is not true, was the scariest thing I've ever been through. So, sorry, I'm looking at this little timeline I've written out so I don't forget. I could not feel the spirit anymore at all. And it was hard. It was just super hard. I couldn't, I just felt like God had forsaken me. Like he was not there anymore. And as much as I wondered and asked and whatever, he wasn't there. I couldn't feel him. And I was angry because I had issue like garments were like bugging me. Like when we go to these golf tournaments, it would be so hot and it'd be like super humid and super hot temperatures. And I'm like sweating in my layers and there's other people, in their light layers looking like they're feeling good. And I'm like, this is hard. And so, but then I was mad because I was like, God, I have not taken off my garments, even though I'm super questioning. I didn't stop going to church, even though it was hard for me. And I was super cynical and like, I'd just be like, duh, or, when people give lessons, I'd be like, that's so stupid in my head, or this is so dumb. This is like so trivial. You guys think this is a big deal? I'm going through this. It's just super negative. But I didn't stop going because of my kids. Like since I didn't know for sure what I wanted to do, I wasn't going to just yank them out of church. So anyway, I was just very angry. I became angry, negative. I don't think I became as angry, negative as some people you see leave, because some it's like they are telling everybody everything they can to get them to go. I wasn't like that, but I was angry. I was super negative. I wasn't myself. That's not my normal self at all. I love people so much, and I just didn't feel as much love for people. I was just in a bad spot.
Right.
So at that time, I couldn't for sure read scriptures anymore. I couldn't listen to conference talks. I didn't want to hear anything from the church, what they had to say. And I was kind of learning more about the anti stuff, but I didn't dig way deep into it. But of course, things come up and you hear it. But I just had this craving for people's stories. Like I did not know one person who had gone through this and made it through to the other side. Everyone I knew that went through faith crisis left the church. Anyone I'd ever heard of that had a faith crisis, they left. So that was scary to me. I was just so desperate to talk to someone who maybe had gone through this and stayed, because I didn't know one person. I remember in a state conference years before I ever struggled with this, there was a lady who was so honest and got up and spoke about how she had struggles with her faith and her husband was in the bishopric. And I really like connected to that talk, but I wasn't struggling then. But I remembered in my head, like, hey, there's one person I've ever heard of that I know that really struggled like this and she made it, but I don't know who she is. Like I didn't remember her name. I didn't know who she was. So I just was hungry for people's stories. And so I started to look online. I started to research stuff like that. I remember one day I started reading or listening to this podcast, and the title made it seem like an LDS, podcast. And I was like 25 minutes into it. And then it was like an anti podcast. And I was like, this makes me mad. Like, they lied to me, basically. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't like I wasn't sure what I believed, but like I was trying to find stories of people in the church that stayed and they totally lied about it to snap, you know what I mean? And I'm thinking like, hey, that was one of the first, that was a big thing for me, I think, was I noticed the hypocrisy in people who had left. I noticed the negativity, the anger, and all my friends. I had a lot of friends that were leaving right about that time, which really shook me. But I just noticed like a bitterness and an angriness, and they would talk about how happy they were, but I didn't see it. Like they weren't happy in their comments to people. And I was still going through this myself, right? But I still had decency to other human beings. I felt like I tried to be respectful to people, even though I was struggling, but I could just see the anger that had boiled up inside of them. And I empathized with it because I was feeling it myself. But just the harshness of it and like the hiding. Like I thought, okay, because I didn't know what I believed, but I'm like, if these people that are anti have a great message that resonates with people, they wouldn't have to hide and lie to me about what they're talking about, So that was kind of in my head. Like, I just didn't feel like they tried to hide or they just were deceitful, I guess, in some of the stuff I'd come across. So that was kind of there, but I still struggled. I was still just really trying to hear stories about people and just trying to just find my footing. And so I let's see. I want to make sure I'm on track here. So I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. But then here I am on my next page. So I've lost my spot. I met with a family member who had left, and she was actually really kind and was like, you know, because I kept feeling like whoever I would talk to or find, they were mostly people who'd left the church. But I kept getting like, well, have you read this? No. Well, then you don't know what you're talking about. Well, have you read this? No. Well, then you don't know. Like it was kind of like, I can't sit with you where you're at. It's like you're not deep enough to talk to me about it. That's just kind of what I felt like I kept running into.
It
And it was
seems
so
like
frustrating.
when I went through this, I went through a very similar process, and it felt like if I wasn't if I didn't agree with everything that they said, I wasn't enlightened enough. That was
Yes,
kind of the
that's
feeling I
exactly it.
got. And I have to say this, and I know you agree with me here. Like there are so like my sisters left the church and they are so much happier in their lives in a lot of ways. Like they're doing beautifully, they are flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, I'm so grateful that they found their path and they found where they're supposed to be.
Right.
And I think the difference in what you're talking about is not people like that. You're talking about
Mm-mm.
people who leave, but they're not happy. And it's those people that are very vocal
Yeah.
and damaging, because if how do I say this? Like if you want me to respect you and your religion and your faith choices, then it goes both ways.
You
Respect
have to respect
me.
mine too,
Yes. And
or
you
where I'm at.
right. And it's like there's not a if you want to leave, great. Good for you. Go find your
Right.
happiness. Go find your truth or whatever you want to call it. Like good for you. But
Right.
don't think that I am some unenlightened being because I don't agree with something that you're saying. If you don't
Right.
want me to think that you're unenlightened for believing
Yeah.
your beliefs, then you need to give me that same respect. And what I'm hearing from you is you weren't finding people um who were respecting your faith journey. And I think that's very
No.
frustrating as just in general. I mean, being where you're at, like I know how discouraging and hard being in that part is because you feel shamed,
Right.
right? You feel like
Yeah.
you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Like you
Yeah.
can't like it doesn't anyway, it's a
Yeah.
really hard spot. So what were you able to find how did you come out of this? And I'm gonna
Well,
put
so
myself back on mute because it's so loud over here.
okay.
So sorry.
Okay. So anyway, that family member kind of said to me, like, if you're not ready to go down that rabbit hole, don't. Because I was saying, I just feel like whoever I talk to, it's like I don't know enough. Like I might need to dig deeper. And she's like, don't do it. And I kind of felt that way on my own too. Like, and I just kind of thought, you know what? This is my salvation. This is not those people that have left. It's not my church's, it's mine. So what I'm going to do is just sit with this. And I'm not going to try and read a bunch more on either side. I know what my church teaches. I know what these people are trying to tell me. So I'm just going to sit with it and I'm going to wait until I feel in my heart what I should do. So I did. I just sat with the uncomfortableness of it, the uncertainty. It was hard. It was a long time and I just sat with it. And I didn't feel like I was getting answers, but I just was patient. And so, let's see. So about a year and a half later, the Come Follow Me came out with so there's more of my story. Sorry, I'm not answering your question yet, but the Come Follow Me came out and I was super angry about it because I was like, hey, my husband's in the bishopric. He's so busy. He's never home on Sundays. He's out of town a lot. He's gone on weeknights. And now it's my job to teach my kids the gospel when I can't do it. Like I can't do this. And church is no longer 3 hours, it's 2. I was just so angry at the prophet, at the church. I was like, how can you do that to me? And so Anyway, I was angry about that.
You're not the only one. And
Yeah.
I'm chuckling over here because I had very similar feelings. Like, really? One more thing on my plate?
Right. I'm like, I cannot do
But
it.
I have
I can't.
since come to make it my own. And we don't, here's the honest truth about the Randall household. We don't do come follow me the way that I think it was designed. We have
Right.
learned to make it our own, and it's now a beautiful thing, but it took us a bit to find our footing there. So anyway,
Right.
keep
Yeah.
going. You're
Yeah.
not alone,
It's
Sara.
hard. Yeah. It was just really tough for me. So about a month after that, we were at a soccer tournament for my daughter. It got snowed out with designs. My husband was like, hey, this guy in our bishopric that I loved, he went on a mission with this guy and he wrote this talk. It's supposed to be super good. Do you mind if we listen to it? So I was like, okay, sure. So we listened to this talk and it was Stand Forever by Lawrence Corbridge, which is the most amazing talk ever. And I was just like, whoa, that was a super good talk.
We'll link to it below, everybody, if you want to
Okay.
know which talk this is.
It's so good. Like it's my favorite talk, I think. And so it just had stuff that really resonated with me. His job was to, as a 70, was to go and read a lot of the anti-Mormon stuff. And he talks about his experience and like essential questions and secondary things. And anyway, it was so good. And he's so powerful. The entire talk is like amazing. And so that kind of softened my heart a little bit, I think. But I still kept struggling. Then I was asked to teach a lesson in like May of that year. So about 2 years after. And I was like, why? In the Relief Society. And it was one of my really good friends that was the Relief Society president. And so I was like, why do you want me, whatever. I'm good friends with you. Okay. So, and she knew I was struggling. I'd been honest with her about it. So, the talk was like, how God is with you even through your trials. And I was like, seriously? I'm like, this is stupid because I don't believe this. Like, I can't teach this talk. So I was talking to my husband about it and he's like, what if you go this way? Or what if you try this? I'm like, no, no. And like, I was super just like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm like, I cannot get up there and be a hypocrite and teach these people this. No. And so the next morning, so he's like, fine. We went to bed. The next morning, I just pretty much said, not even in a prayer. Maybe I think I did kneel down and say a prayer. I was pretty much like, God, if you want me to do this lesson, you put something in you give me something because I cannot do this and I'm not going to do it. So this podcast popped up on my phone and it's because I told my friend, I want to hear people's stories. She told me about this is the gospel. And I'd heard a few that were like, I lost my necklace and I prayed to God and he helped me find it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. So I quit listening. But this came up and it popped up and I can't remember the title of it, but I was like, maybe that could help with this lesson. So I'll listen to it. So I went to the gym and I listened and it was a beautiful story about this lady who had, they were super poor, they were going to college. Her husband was super, super poor. He'd gone out to like, I think 1 or 2 meals a day just to feed the family. And she woke up one morning, it was super gloomy. She just wanted her comfort food, which was like cream of wheat. And she went to eat it and had no sugar. And she said she just was like so upset, so frustrated. Like, I don't even have a teaspoon of sugar to give my baby, like just so low. And she said she had a knock on her door and it was this lady who was like from Africa who barely spoke English with a jar of sugar. And she was like, how did she bring me that? Like, how did she know to bring me a jar of sugar? Like, I didn't even utter this as a prayer. I didn't even ask for sugar. She didn't bring me bread. She didn't bring me cookies. It was a jar of sugar. And that was so touching to me. I was like, oh my gosh. And so she said, I knew God gave me that experience so that later on, she had twins that passed away, so that later on, I could go back to that and draw strength from that. So I was like, okay, I cannot say that I feel God right now through this trial, but I cannot deny that I have felt God in the past. And probably her story softened me enough that I could admit that. So I decided to teach the lesson and I just felt really strongly like I should get up and just be honest with everybody about my struggles and just say, I'm not going to teach this lesson, but I can teach this. And so I did. And I got a lot of positive feedback. Like people were like, we loved how honest you were. Thank you. You know, it was like so refreshing to hear you be honest about your struggles. And so that was a good experience, but I still really struggled. I mean, it didn't pull me out of it. I just kept struggling. So finally, I was open with my friend. She was walking by one day out front and she's like, how you doing? And I said, you know, I'm really struggling. I just am having the hardest time with my faith. And I was close enough to her. I felt okay to tell her. She's like, you know what? Me too. She's like, I've just had some questions about things lately. And so we talked and she was so kind, sent me a text. I think it was a couple days later and said, hey, how would you feel about reading this book? I know a few other women in our ward who could really use this. And it was Navigating a Mormon Faith Crisis. And I was like, sure, yeah, let's read it. And so we got together once a week and we discussed it, and it was really good. I have it here. It's by, I always forget names of people. Wirthlin McConkie. It's Thomas Wirthlin McConkie. And Navigating Mormon Faith Crisis. And it was just, it's really good because he just talks about like kind of your stages of life and how people operate. And I can't remember exactly what he studies. It's like
We'll
human
link to
behavior.
this to everybody.
Okay. So it's like human behavior, but he just talks about how you have these different areas in your life where like you draw on your parents, you know, testimony and you're good with that for a while. And then things change and you start to get independent, but then you reach a point in your life where you start to question what you believe because you want a deeper understanding of like, why am I doing this? Is it really important? It's kind of like a midlife crisis for some people. You just start to really look at what do I believe and why. And so he just basically talks about how that's normal. That's a normal process of life, which made it was good for me to hear that like, hey, this isn't that abnormal because I felt like I was an alien for a while. But it was so good for us just to get together and talk. And we ended up not reading as much of the book by the end, but like talking more. And we agreed when we started that group that we could talk about anything we wanted to, but we weren't going to bash. And that we all wanted to stay. That was our goal. So like to set parameters up that we felt like that was good enough boundaries so that we weren't just coming and having a bashing session, which I felt like was super important because we could talk about anything respectfully. So it was just awesome. Those women helped me so much. And you know, it helped a ton. And so I feel like I was kind of climbing the hill, you know, and I was on an upward trajectory at least, but I still struggled for a long time. That was in the summer of 2019. And then went into the next year, and then COVID hit and we couldn't do our book club anymore. But COVID was, as you know, so hard. And it just made me kind of start to like think about things and question things. And then my dad passed away a week after they shut everything down. And that was super hard. And here you go with the grief again and the wondering. And I was just felt super like, oh my gosh, I think the world is like ending right now. You know, because remember with COVID, it was like crazy. You know, everything was shut down. And then a week after that, we had that earthquake. And I was just like, the world is ending. Like, I really thought the second coming was like tomorrow. And it just made me really think about what do I believe and why? Like, and I'd been listening to all these things. And anyway, I was just like, I've got to pick a side. Like, I have to decide whether I believe or not. And I just kind of thought, well, I would rather be on God's side. Honestly, like, I would rather be on God's side than whatever this confusion is over here that I've experienced. So I just kind of was like, I think and I looked back at Come Follow Me, and we were doing church at home when COVID hit. And I could not deny that the prophet received revelation for that. I could not deny that was a miracle. Like, so that was huge to me. I think that was a huge part of it for me too. So, yeah, I just kind of from there, it got better and better. I still struggled though. I mean, all of that happened and I still struggled. We started another group later with women, and, it was a bigger group, and these were all people in my ward, by the way. So if people think this isn't going on around them, I feel like we live in a really amazing pocket of people who are good people. So if we had that many people, and that's not including their husbands, and there were more people. So like this is happening to a lot of people. And I just felt so strongly. I kept saying to my husband, there's got to be a place for people like me to go. Like, can't you talk to the bishop and let him know that we need to start like groups or something? I'm like, we can hold him at our house. And he was like, yeah, but like, can you see how hard that would be for the bishop to do that? And what if it goes rogue and there's this huge group of people in the ward that like, you know, so he's like, it's just hard. And I'm like, no, I get that. Like, I get it. I was always blessed with a little bit of compassion for like leaders and stuff. And so I just kept going, there needs to be a place for people like me to go. Like, and so one day I said, I feel like I need to talk to like the prophet or like the apostles about this, and see is there something we can come up with, And he's like, well, start with the stake president. That's how you start. So he's like, all right. So I made an appointment with them, went and talked to him, and I love him. I've always had a love for him. I served in a bishopric with them and in the Relief Society, and he talked to me and he was just like, Sara, I have a question for you. I said, yeah. And he said, well, I asked him if there's a place for people like me. And he said, no, we don't have anything like that. But I'm very interested in this topic and I would love to talk to you more about it and I really want to hear from people like you who are struggling. But he said, I have a question for you. Do you feel like God has abandoned you? And I just started bawling. I was like, yes, that is how I felt for years. I just feel like God has turned his back on me and I cannot, no matter what I do or it's like he's gone. And he said, I don't know why, but he said, so many people in your position say the same thing. And he's like, I don't have an answer why, but I just know that you're not the only one that goes through this. It's common. And so I was like, okay, and we talked quite a bit. And anyway, when I left there, I pulled out of the parking lot and I got this huge, like overwhelming feeling that like I had to pull off the side of the road. I just started to cry. I just felt like, okay, you had to understand, Sara, what it's like to go without the Spirit so you can make a choice of whether you want it or not. You had to see what it was like. And so that was kind of an answer to me that like, you had to go through this hard thing so you could see how that felt. And so, anyway, that was a big deal. I was like, okay, God knows me. Like, and I felt like that was from God. That was like, you had to experience this. So anyway,
do you still feel like God, did he abandon you or did you?
My heart was hardened.
Yeah, like, how like I can hear in the back of my head, because when I went through this same thing, I felt abandoned. And I came to the realization that I wasn't abandoned. My back was turned.
Yes, that's
And all
exactly.
I needed to do was turn around and see that God was there the whole time.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, how do you reconcile that? Feeling like you're abandoned? Did he actually leave you or did you leave him? Like, what was the answer that you received? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. Well, this is what perspective brings, right? So as I was writing this out, well, and even before then, I could look back and I could see these experiences and see God's hand in my life. But at the time, you cannot see it. Or
Right.
even if I was like, okay, I felt really good about that. It wasn't how I used to feel when I felt the Spirit. So I didn't recognize that as like, okay, this is God right now. Like I felt good. That story of that lady made me feel so good and so like happy. And that was the Spirit. But I was so hardened at the time that it like, I don't know if I'd call it the Spirit. And it was fleeting. Like I felt so good for a little bit. And then I went right back to feeling how I felt. So it was like, well, that wasn't what I thought it was then.
I would say it was the Spirit. You were feeling the
It
Spirit
was.
the whole time, but
Yeah.
because you weren't, um, how do I say this? Like, from my perspective, I was resistant to feeling the Spirit and I was resistant to God because I thought that he had abandoned me because of my experience. You guys all know my story. I don't need to reiterate it, but I felt like he had turned his back on me, but really it was the other way around. And so when I would
Yeah.
feel the Spirit, like you said, like I didn't recognize that this was the God's hand in my life until later. Now I can see, looking back through that whole experience, like, wow, he inspired that girl to put on that talk, right? He inspired your friend to do this other thing. He inspired your friend to
Yeah.
invite you to read that book. Like all these things were
Right.
God's hand and trying to get you back,
Mm-hmm.
back to his loving arms. But sometimes we are so hurt
Mm-hmm.
and so clouded that we can't see it for what it is.
Yeah, for sure. That's for sure what it was. You know, hindsight's always 2020, of course, but and how like I'd already been like, I'm not listening to that podcast again, but I had to be in just this right place for me to even consider it. And I was taken there. And I
Right.
even texted my friend and was like, why did you give me this topic to speak on? And she's like, I don't know. Like, we didn't even have a topic. Natalie did. So I text Natalie and I was like, Natalie, why did you give me this topic to speak on? And she's like, we'd already planned it. She's like, it was in the lineup, but so and so couldn't teach it. So we just thought it'd be a good idea to ask you. Like, it, no, because I thought they gave me this topic because they know I'm struggling with this and they want me to have to study it. Like, I was so mad about it. And they both were like, we don't even know, you know? So it's just funny, like, how that lined up. Cause I really have talked to him since it was not planned that way. Like, all these things had to be in place
But
for me to
God
even be
knew.
willing
And
what
they
I
were
needed.
like in a place where they could feel like the spirit prompt them to ask you, but they probably didn't even recognize that it was the spirit either. They were just
Mm-mm.
like, but like, isn't
Just
that
sound like a
funny?
good idea.
Well, and that's life. Like, so many
Yeah.
things are not a coincidence. They are God working in our lives. And if we can just open our minds and open our hearts, we will see his hand in all things. It is
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you
That's easy
feel
when you're
like
in a good place.
you're yes. Oh, I know. I know it's really hard when you're not there. What do you
Yeah.
what's your advice for people? I mean, you can finish your story. Sorry. I was just gonna say,
Well,
like, do you feel like now I mean, obviously you're in a stronger place, but tell us honestly, you still have questions? You
it
still have
took a while. Yes. I still have questions that pop up. I still some days will get this gloom and be like, gosh, do I really I do believe this, right? Like, yes, I'm all in, right? And it is, but I can finally say in the past probably like half a year to a year that I'm probably stronger now than I was before. So like this is all for your good, right? Experiences for our good and whatever, but it just took a long time to dig out of that hole. So like it's been almost 6 years and I can finally say, okay, I'm in a good place now. And it's hard because I started another group, right? And me and some other women, but I wasn't very kind to one of the women in that group, and she was really struggling. But I had just been searching and studying and listened to podcasts, and I was listening to the saints because I thought, if I don't even know the history of my own church, how can I make a judgment? Like, I really need to know my church's history. Like, I think in my head I know it, but do I know the details? No, I don't. And that's the same with a lot of other things, a lot of misconceptions about people. You don't there is a culture here and you learn what you learn as you grow up and you just assume you know things. But how much do you really know about our church?
and how
I
much
would,
is this culture passed down?
yes, most of us are not historians. So we are not going through the fine details of the history of our church. And I don't think it's being hidden from us. I just don't think it's being highlighted. And how many of us in our lives highlight the worst parts of our lives? Like, you don't. You expect our church to highlight the worst parts. You know what I mean? So,
Well,
but a
and
lot
why?
of,
Like, why does it even? I came to the realization like so much of the issues I was having and the questions I were having didn't matter. Like,
it
it
doesn't
came down to
matter.
the point of like, does it really matter that Brigham Young said or did this, or Joseph Smith said or did this, or whatever? Like, some of those things didn't matter. There were other things that did matter, and
Right.
luckily, those things have been fixed and corrected. Like the
Mm-hmm.
blacks in the priesthood was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
And luckily that's been remedied and
Right.
it's no longer an issue. I think that there's still some trauma there and there's still some
Yeah.
hurt feelings um and I think valid hurt feelings. But at the
Right.
same time, I've come to realize like We can't judge people for the culture and the experiences that they were having at that time. We didn't live then. We don't know
No.
what it was like. We don't know the types of pressures. We don't know all of the context, right? Context is what matters when you're, and on top of that, who am I to judge?
That's exactly the thought I kept having. Like, I was blessed with compassion. I've always been a compassionate person for people, but throughout it, I was kind of blessed with a compassion for the leaders, Joseph. So even though I was super angry and super mad, I always had this, but what if, like, Sarah, what if your husband were Joseph Smith? What if when he was a boy at 14, he was told this and this was revealed to him and everyone started to hate his guts because he told some people and they basically ruined his life, right? And they attacked it. Like, that's traumatic enough. And then he goes through all of these other things and his babies die and like someone does not go through all that for nothing. Like, I kept just feeling like he cannot be a fraud. Like, he had horrible things happen to him. And I also felt a huge as I was in that book club, I just felt like this pull from my ancestors almost. I don't know how. I just kept thinking I had family who lived at that time with Joseph Smith. Do you think they're idiots? Like, do you think that these people who knew him and lived with him every day were stupid? Like, no, these were hardworking men and women who like tilled the land and like, and they lived amongst him. So like, go to them. Like, I kind of have this like pull towards my ancestors. Like, they love me more than anything. They wouldn't have lied to me and crossed the plains for a fraud. Like, there's too many things that, you know what I mean? But that's the advice I would give to somebody, honestly, is sit with it. Like, you have to study your own church as much as you're studying the things against it. At least give it that, because you think in your head you know all these things about your church, but when you really go to like, what is the gospel? I mean, what is the doctrine on this topic? It's probably different than what you think it is. And I kept thinking like, have I ever learned anything in this church that's been like totally contrary to what Jesus taught? No. I cannot go back and look at my whole history of my whole life, and we weren't active when we were little, but anything that was taught that's contrary to like Christ's gospel. I have always been taught to be a good person. I was like, I just had to kind of go, what are the fruits of the church? Service, love each other, don't judge, be kind, you know what I mean? And all the things I've always been taught, I thought none of those things are negative. Now, there are people in the church who are weird. There are people in the church, and I'm weird. I could be weird to someone, right? Like, there are people in the church who make mistakes. There are people, I learned a lot about people's personalities. I learned a lot about different personality types and why people do what they do. And I say this a lot, but I'm like, who's going to take the call to be a bishop? A rule follower or the guy that doesn't give a crap about rules? Probably the rule follower. So when he deals with things and he does things, he's going to be a rule follower, some of them. So he might do something that offends you because in the book, he goes by the law, where other people go by more by their feelings and their heart because that's their personality. Like, you cannot, people are people and they're doing their best. Most people are just doing their best. Like, I had to kind of come to that, Joseph Smith was doing his best. I honestly believe that. And so I kind of regained my compassion for people because I've always loved people. I think I'm kind of an empath. I hate that. An empath, not like I have this major spiritual thing, but I have always taken people's feelings on. Like, I love people. I love when I meet them and I feel like I just get this feeling from them. And for me, it's like a spirit to spirit kind of thing. More than like, I don't remember people's names very well because I don't, it's like how I feel. And I've always been that way. So I learned to give people a break, they're doing their best.
Give people
just like you are. And they're not judging you half as much as you think they are. You're being self-conscious.
Yeah, it's your
when you're
own
struggling
judgment
and
being
going through
reflected
it.
back to you, really.
Yeah. You feel so judged. And honestly, who's judging you? There are not that many people they love you. And they might not know what to say to you. So it feels lonely. They don't know how to talk to you about it because it's hard. So,
And it's awkward. No one
yeah,
wants to feel like a project, and no one wants to make anyone feel like they're a project, right? It's like
no,
if you know
yeah,
someone who's
tough.
struggling, there's so much doubt about, well, what do I say? What do I do? You love them. You act
You
like a
love them.
normal human being. You
Yep.
ask, how can I best support you? Like, I'm here to
Yeah.
listen. I'm here to vent, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
it's really interesting. Like, when you go through these faith crises, it's really a good point to notice that we can have these and they can be to any magnitude, right? Like your faith
Mhm.
crisis right now could be something so much shorter and smaller than what Sara went through, right? And like
Right.
yours was
Or
six
way
years
worse.
or way worse. Like there's just such a and I think it's important to note, like, you can have a lot of these. like like you
Yeah.
don't just have to have one. Like
No, it's throughout your life.
yeah, you can have different stages of your times where you're like, I just don't know about this. I'm really
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure. I'm feeling alone. I'm feeling abandoned. I'm feeling whatever it is. Like, and those are, you shared this amazing talk with me that I'm going to link down below by
Mhm.
Jared
Jared Halverson.
Halverson
Mm-hmm.
about the fall, about the creation, fall, and the atonement, and
Which
how
is so good.
um the title of it was, don't let a good
Good
faith
faith
crisis
crisis.
go to waste, right?
Yep.
Don't let a good
Mm-hmm.
faith crisis go to waste. I love that
Yeah.
title so
Mm-hmm.
much because it's like, yes, like this could be for your benefit. And I
It
remember
is.
I remember getting up and bearing my testimony while you were going through all of this. And I said something to the effect of, questions are good because questions lead to revelation. And
Mm-hmm.
questions make you stop and say, what do I believe? Let me go find the answers. And
Mm-hmm.
I have really, like, I didn't know you were going through that at the time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but that, like, for me has been something I have really stuck by for the last few years. And I have
Yeah.
since had a lot of friends confide in me that they have questions and that they're having a faith
Mm-hmm.
crisis. And we talk about this. I'm like, this is good. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember in my ward a few weeks ago, a woman said, if you have questions, go to the source. Go to the
Mm-hmm.
source of your questions. If you've got a
Yeah.
temple question, go to the temple. Study
Mm-hmm.
about the temple. Go talk to the temple president. Y'all, did you
Yeah.
know that you can schedule a meeting with anyone in the temple presidency? There's like
Mm.
6 of them who are in the temple presidency. It's not just the temple president and his counselor, their wives, the
Mm.
recorder and his wife, like the matrons. Like, you can go talk to any one of them about any of your questions, and there's nothing off limits. You can ask anything. They might not know the answer,
Mm-hmm.
right? They might not know. But if
Yeah.
you go with the intention of receiving revelation,
Mm-hmm.
I really think that you'll get it.
Yeah.
I do think that there is times when if we're feeling abandoned, let's talk about that for a minute. If you're asking these questions and you don't feel like you're finding the answer, what do we do, Sara?
Yeah. I feel like I keep saying this, but there's so much missionary work to be done within our own church. Like there's so much outside, but there's so much inside right now. And it's just the way the world's changed. It's views from the world. But there's so much more information. And that's what in that talk with Lawrence Corbett, she's like, there's so much information, there's misinformation, there's all kinds of information coming at us, right? And honestly, a good portion of that information is not going to be truthful
Yeah.
or, correct.
Unfortunately, a lot
Yeah.
of it's not. It's a lot of like quotes taken out of context.
Yes.
And at least in my research, a lot of what I found was misleading information. Like a
Right.
little piece of it was true,
Yeah.
but then like it was blown so far out of proportion. You're like, wait, that's not even like really what was
Right.
meant. Or you go back, like they take one quote and then you go and you read the whole book or the whole article that it was taken from, and you're like, that's not even like at all what was being meant by that. Like, wow.
No.
And I just feel like it's so deceiving.
Yeah. But
Anyway.
most people won't do the research on that. Most people are not going to go, they're going to read it and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. They don't like go back to the source and like real, because it takes time, right? It's a lot of work. So I think though, honestly, just know if you're going through this, there are other people who are going through it, and maybe reach out. Maybe reach out to someone you trust. And I know that I worried so much about poisoning someone else, or if you go to someone and talk to them and just say, I'm having this problem, you don't have to spew all of your negative stuff. Just start to talk. I think there's so many people who would talk to you, and you're going to be surprised to find that there are other people going through the same thing too. The way I found people is I got up in church once and I bore my testimony, and I was careful, be respectful. I didn't go in and just say, I don't even know if this church is true, whatever. I was just like, gosh, I've been struggling. I have friends that are leaving. It's been so hard for me. And just putting it out there is going to bring people to you that are struggling with the same thing. But I do feel like you have to be careful. You just don't take care of yourself. Don't put yourself in the hands of people who all they want are for you to join their misery. You know what I mean? Because that's their goal. I think you just have to be careful and but it's hard. And I think I've said this, I feel like the people I know who've gone through this, and men, their anger phase is a little angrier. I don't know. I think they're more fact-based, a lot of them. I think that they research more, you know what I mean? They're more factual. So and I think women are a little more feeling. I'm not saying that's across the board. But so I think when men go through this, their anger levels are higher. I think they make up their minds quicker about I don't believe this stuff. Where women might think on it more emotionally. That's just been my experience and the people I've talked to and the groups I've been in. And so that's hard. It's hard to deal with. But I think if you can just pull back from that and just be like, I know I'm angry, but I'm not going to shut this side out. You have to listen to both, right? If you're honestly wanting to find the truth, you have to consider both sides. You cannot just consider one. And you can't assume that you know everything about our church, because I promise you don't. You know, yeah, it's just, there's so much more. The doctrine is so much more pure than we think it is.
And I think you had touched on this earlier about you can ask questions without being doubtful. There's a difference between questioning and being doubting. It's your intention. Questions, if you have a question with the intention of receiving an answer and receiving revelation, it will come. It might not come immediately, but it will come. And you have to be open to receiving an answer, and open to receiving an answer of whatever that answer is. It might be an answer that you don't like. You might come to find out the Mormon massacre really did happen. Right. And that's really disappointing, right? You might find out that whatever it is, the answer might be something that's disappointing, but realizing then that you can then find out, okay, well, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? And I always came back to, what is my testimony founded on? And what is the point of a testimony? Does it really matter about these random facts and these random events? Are they eternally significant to my salvation? What is my testimony founded on? My testimony is founded on, did Joseph Smith really have a vision? Right. Is the Book of Mormon? And then to answer that, for me, it was, well, how do I feel when I read the Book of Mormon? So if you're not sure about Joseph Smith, go back to the Book of Mormon, read the Book of Mormon, and spend some time in there and asking, how do I feel when I read this? Do I feel good? Am I getting answers? Am I feeling closer to God when I read this book? Yes or no? Yeah. And then, well, if the answer is yes, I feel good when I read this, I do feel like this is a book from God. Okay, then Joseph Smith was a prophet. Did he make mistakes? Was he human? Was he learning how to be a prophet? Was the church growing? All those things. Can I give grace for that? And then I come back to, okay, well, is our church currently the church? Because that was back then. Are we currently receiving revelation? Is the temple the house of the Lord? What do we do in the temple? Do I feel empowered now that I have an endowment? What is the whole point of the temple and going back to heaven? And I like how you talked about the Tyler Corbridge's, or no, what's his name?
Lawrence E. Corbridge, I think.
Lawrence Corbridge. I have a friend named Tyler Corbridge. So that's why I always his name comes back to my mind. But going back to the primary questions and what are
Yeah,
really important and really finding your
it is.
foundation.
You
And
have to
Halver
figure
says
that out
the
first.
same thing, right? He's like,
Yes.
where are you at in your testimony?
Do
Do you
you
even
even believe in
there?
God?
Yes. Do you even believe in a God? Okay.
Yes.
If you don't, then let's start there. Let's start
Right.
with God and let's start
Yeah.
with where you're at. And like,
Yeah.
sometimes we can, like your friend said, don't go down that rabbit hole, like until you're strong. I'm now in a place where I can go down those rabbit holes with people.
Yeah.
They can bring up things. And it doesn't shake my faith anymore because my faith is so strong in the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
It's so strong in the foundation. It's so strong in the Book of Mormon and
Mm-hmm.
in Joseph Smith and in the temple
Mm-hmm.
that I am. People can bring up all sorts of stuff, and I'm like, all right,
Right.
let's research, let's find
Yeah.
out the truth. And
Yeah.
my eyes have been so opened with all of this that I'm really grateful for people who come and talk to me about their faith crisis. So if
Right.
you're one of those and you're not even sure who to talk to or where to start, our Facebook group, find me
Yes.
on Facebook and or message me on the YouTube, whatever you want to do, and just start that conversation. Like, you're not
Mm-hmm.
alone. You're not
Right.
alone. I'm
And
about to
that
get kicked out of my spot here, but
like you're shooting a
um
movie back there or what?
I'm not really sure, but I think I'm about to get kicked out. So I think this is our
Yeah.
sign that we need to wrap up. But is there
Yeah.
any other last pieces of advice, Sarah?
Um, so sorry if I keep oh, I just had a fleeting thought. It went away. I do have a thought. Um, a lot of people ask, how do I help people in this situation? And it is just love them. It is love them through it. You're never going to be able to say anything that convinces that person that the church is true. Not one thing you say is ever going to be convincing enough. If you get into those arguments about doctrinal issues, whatever, if you have a good relationship and you're able to talk it through on a respectful way, that's okay to have discussions. But just, I think you just have to know you're dealing with someone who's probably really angry, and anything you say is not going to make them, oh my gosh, you're right. So just love them. You just have to love them where they're at. And in more podcasts, I've heard stories about like how people know God helped them to see the truth, and it's individual to you. There's never going to be a perfect answer that answers all your things, but God's going to speak to you in ways that you will hear him. So like when you hear these stories, it's different for everybody how they came to know. So it's God will answer you in your own way. You just have to be patient, and God is there. I used to think a faith crisis was like the worst thing that could ever happen to someone. Like, oh my gosh. But now I know it's not. I know that like that's just part of their journey and they're gonna be fine. Just know that they're gonna be fine. And even if it takes 25 years, I just listened to a story of a guy. It was 25 years later. He was super belligerent, but God
Dusty Smith.
spoke to him. Yes. God
So
spoke to him
he's
in
going to be
ways.
on our show soon.
Okay. It was just amazing after all that time. And he was so hardened that he could come back. Right. So for family members, it's not the end of the world. Just be patient and love them through it. And, you know, it's hard. It's a hard place to be in for both. But yeah, I think we're going to come out stronger in the end. And I think people, hopefully, I think with the world going the way it is, the good and bad is definitely getting I think we're just gonna have to choose, and
But we
people are gonna
need,
see the truth.
and people need to, they can't rely on their parents' testimony. Like
No.
Jared Halverson says in that talk, like, we have to figure out what you believe so that you can be strong, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can work out your own salvation.
Yeah.
Salvation is an individual affair.
Mm-hmm.
This is your testimony, is your testimony in your relationship with God. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
anyone else. Yes, your
No.
family is involved, and I don't want to like deny that your family connections are important. Yes, they absolutely
Mm-hmm.
are. But
Mm-hmm.
you have to have your own testimony. You can't rely on other people's. And
Right.
it's becoming so obvious how
Mm-hmm.
important personal revelation and a personal testimony are in today's world.
Yeah.
And it's just getting worse and even more important. So really, if you're having a faith crisis right now, count your blessings that you're having it now and not in 10 years.
Right. And
Because
it's a
it'd be
faith
harder.
journey. It's a
Yes.
faith journey. That's what I was gonna say. I spoke in this word and the Relief Society president said, I just want people to know it's a faith journey. And I thought that's so true.
Yes.
It's not like this. It doesn't have to be the end. Like
Yeah.
it's a journey. So this is a really, really hard, but it's not the end. It's just part of your journey.
Yes, I love it. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for being here and willing to share your story and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
I know so many people who are currently going through what you went through, and we're opening up a little discussion group at our house and welcoming people to just talk and just, I like how your parameters are, right? Like the goal is to come unto Christ,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like for you,
All
and
right.
not bash the church, but just to find answers and to find
Have
community.
honest discussion.
When I talked to a member of the stake presidency about this, because of what we had talked about before, um, they had decided that it couldn't be a church sponsored thing because of the administration and how it could go rogue and all these things. Like it just
It's
complicated
hard.
everything. But he's like, I want people to do this on their own. He's like, we don't want
Right.
to stop people from doing good things. So if you
Right.
want to meet with each other and have your own Bible study and you want to have your own like
Right.
groups and your own discussion groups, go for it with the
Right.
intention of coming into Christ. And you always start with a prayer and all these things. Like there's a way to do it that it's
Yeah.
safe
Yeah.
and that you are strengthening your testimonies and you are glorifying God and all those things. Like you can
Mhm.
do it safe. So anyway, if you want to chat, I'm here for you. Our links to our Facebook group are in there. You can message me in the YouTube. I'm here for you. There's no judgment for me whatsoever. Like I get it. Like we've been through hell and back, and life is not easy, and your questions and your feelings are valid, and sometimes you just need to know that you're not an alien, like Sara said.
Mhm.
That you're not an alien, and you're not. You
That's
are a
what's wrong.
beautiful son or daughter of God, and he loves you, and he just wants you to be happy.
Hmm.
That's it. The
Yeah.
confusion and the pit and the despair that you're feeling are not of him. They're
Hmm.
not. He's
Mm-mm.
not giving you this confusion. He's not giving you this fear.
No.
He wants you to have joy and he wants you to have peace, and you can find it. And I know you can. And I love you all. Thank you for being a part of our community and watching these shows and sharing them and stuff like that. Let us know what you think. Thanks everybody. Until next week. And thanks again, Sara, for being here.
Yeah. Thank you.